we've heard about the benefits that 5G can have on the financial services sector. So we'll now have a panel of telecommunication experts. This panel will discuss how companies and governments benefit from 5G adoption. They will also discuss how regulators can balance the benefits of faster connectivity with data security, privacy and ownership. Moderated by Uriel Morrison, co-founder and chief executive officer of Ring. He will be joined by Qualcomm's president of Taiwan, Hong Kong and Southeast Asia, ST Liu, Mark Chong, group chief technology officer of Singtel, and Naveen Menon, president of ASEAN for Cisco Systems. Over now to Uriel and her panel of distinguished speakers.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by wishing everyone a warm welcome and greetings from Singapore. COVID-19 has made the anticipated digital future a stark current reality. The pandemic has reinforced the imperative for businesses and individuals to be digitally ready. Digital technology creates new opportunities for individuals and businesses, enhances competitiveness and productivity, and critically in today's context, supports business and social continuity in turbulent conditions. If our economic resilience and competitiveness lies in digitalization, then its foundation rests on 5G. Its higher bandwidth, lower latencies, and dynamic network capabilities will catalyze a wave of transformation across industries and unlock novel applications. According to the Global System for Mobile Communications, GSMA, the number of global IoT connections between 2019 and 2025 will more than double to almost 25 billion. New products and services in IoT, as well as other areas like autonomous vehicles and robotics and augmented reality, will create new revenue streams that are expected to add $2.2 trillion to the global economy by 2034. What must we do to realize these gains? The supply side is key, which means investments in infrastructure. In Asia, cities such as Hong Kong, Seoul, Tokyo, and Shenzhen have already introduced 5G networks. Singapore too is investing in the development of a nationwide, secure and resilient, world-class 5G communications network. With the 5G spectrum awarded to the mobile network operators in June 2020, we are on track for 2 full-fledged 5G standalone networks covering at least half of the country by end 2022 and full nationwide coverage by end 2025. But equally important is the demand side. In other words, developing viable use cases. Singapore's vision is to be a global frontrunner for innovation in 5G applications and services. To catalyze 5G innovation, Singapore government has set aside $30 million in June 2019 to further support 5G trial use cases, develop open live testbeds, and fund 5G R&D. For example, the Infocomm Media Development Authority and Maritime Port Authority of Singapore are collaborating with Airbus on smart port operations for our maritime industry, conducting coastal 5G trials to assess the safety and efficiency of unmanned aerial vehicles. For consumers, we are collaborating with Razer, a technology company headquartered in Singapore and the US, on the region's first 5G cloud gaming trial. In the area of smart mobility and smart estates, we are trialing 5G for the deployment of autonomous vehicles. Both the supply and demand sides must be undergirded by robust security arrangements. The unprecedented connectivity enabled by 5G will substantially increase the cyber threat attack surface. In Singapore, we have built in comprehensive security and resilience requirements for our 5G network operators. We adopt a security by design approach and emphasize vendor diversity for resilience. Additionally, our regulator is partnering with our mobile network operators to establish a 5G security testbed program for technology exploration to better protect us from current and emerging 5G network cyber threats and vulnerabilities. So let me conclude. The success and sustainability of our digitalization efforts hinges critically on close collaboration between industry, community partners, and government. These partnerships are critical in ensuring a secure and resilient 5G infrastructure and compelling use cases that will position us well to realize the full potential of the global 5G opportunity. It also calls for cross-border partnerships to build interoperable systems to secure a thriving, secure, and inclusive digital future for all. We in Singapore look forward to working with all global partners from the public and private sectors in this important endeavor, and I wish everyone a fruitful discussion ahead. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Milken Institute's Asia Conference and our session today, where we are talking about 5G and how essentially it's not only an enabler for the next wave of growth in smart digital technologies, but also, of course, very much so the next boost for global GDP. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Oriel Morrison. I'm a former business news anchor, current company founder, and clearly I love to have a chat. And we do have the perfect opportunity today to talk about a very significant issue because, of course, we all know that 5G is not simply just a faster wireless network. Essentially, its reach and its knock-on impact is going to touch every aspect of our lives, you know, whether we're talking about the consumer side or the business side. The basic facts are that 5G does deliver speeds 100 times faster than the current networks, much lower latency, it uses less power, so of course it's more environmentally friendly as well. But the biggest impact will be in the acceleration and the pace of change. And of course for business, it means that companies should already be assessing their operations and their business models to take advantage of any productivity gains that will come as a result. We know that a number of companies around the world are already working on this. There's an automotive 5G manufacturing plant launched last year in Germany. Bosch has a 5G factory also in the UK. Now, a great stat for you on this particular subject: in ASEAN alone, 5G could add 6 to 9% to consumer revenues, 18 to 22% to enterprise revenues by 2025, and to get there, around 10 billion is going to have to be spent on infrastructure. Not always going to be easy, though. There are some challenges, one of which is the global development over different geographies are going to differ in terms of the manufacture and the speed. So that's going to have to be taken into account, and we can't forget cybersecurity. So in all of this, we've got a big topic to discuss today. Let's get straight to our panelists. I'm honoured today to be joined by Mark Chong, the Group CTO from Singtel. ST Liu is with us, VP and President, Qualcomm Taiwan and Southeast Asia, and Naveen Menon, President, ASEAN for Cisco Systems. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. Very much looking forward to our discussion. Now, one of the biggest questions I think we need to ask today is, are we ready for 5G? Mark, I'm going to take you get you to take that question first as the CTO of Singtel.
Thank you very much, Oriel. But perhaps for a start, I think it will be useful to recap the attributes of 5G versus 4G. So you have mentioned much faster speeds. But the other point about 5G is also that it has much faster response time, the network response time. So in industry parlance, we talk about lower latency. And 5G also provides denser connections. So roughly about 1 million connections per square kilometer versus 10,000 connections per square kilometer in 4G. But I think the most important point for me when network operators like us build 5G is that we enable the whole network to become programmable. What this means is that it allows enterprises, businesses to gain control of a slice of the network to do whatever they wish to do, to raise productivity, to run their operations, etc. So where are we now on 5G? The first network, mobile network on 5G was launched about a year ago. So since then, there are now about 110 networks, 5G networks deployed around the world, covering 7% of the world's population. If we consider that 4G currently covers about 75% of the population in developed economies and medium-sized economies, we can see that there's a lot of growth left, to be had in 5G. We are very much in the early days of 5G. The 100-odd networks that have been deployed use an early variant of 5G that still sits on 4G. You don't get the full benefits of 5G that we mentioned. But come next year, roughly in the middle of next year, you'll get the full suite of 5G benefits. So that's currently the state of play on 5G.
Yeah, it certainly seems like we're on a road. Whether we're there yet, though, is the question, whether we're ready. ST, let me bring you into the conversation. Because clearly, you know, you've got a robot behind you, so you're clearly technologically advanced. But let me ask you on a serious note, do you think that we're ready for 5G, or how far away are we?
Well, I think with any new technologies, especially technologies that's so wide and so expensive in this coverage, the early stages is going to take a little bit of time. However, if you are to gauge the 5G progress since, let's say, 2019 till now, I would say 2019 is probably the first year where 5G went into commercialization. If I were to compare last year and this year to the entire starting phase of 4G, it is very obvious to us that there's some market difference between the two. I still remember when we first launched 4G in the beginning, in the first year, I could only choose like from 4 different models of 4G phones. And there were only a handful of 4G networks in the world. But in 5G, you know, Mark just said that, and I testified to that as well, there are more than 100 networks commercialized across the world in more than 40 countries. And in fact, there are more than 300 devices, smartphone, tablets, you know, PCs, all manner of devices that would have 5G features on them, either have been launched or been developed. So we are off to a very steep and very quick learning and growth in 5G. Partially it's because we already have a very robust ecosystem and an awareness of what digital and mobile communication can bring. So the market and the people who are players in this field know that, you know, just to reuse the very often used sentence, if you build that, they will come. A lot of the 4G applications and the 4G so-called killer applications come because 4G provides such benefits and such, you know, such characteristic that these things can be achieved. Now, 5G comes along with even more enhanced thing. And I think that I'm very optimistic that we're going to see a faster growth in 5G. And in fact, it will open up a lot more innovation because, like Mark said, we're at the beginning of 5G. It is on, you know, what we call non-standalone networks. That will allow us to build up the network, utilizing existing networks and grow 5G on top of the existing network, and then move into future, hopefully with also millimeter wave and really demonstrate the capability of 5G. And when you have that, what it does is that it doesn't only bring benefits to users such as you and I, it also drives an entire ecosystem of innovations, because 5G is no longer just about smartphone. It is about smart factories, it's about smart automotive, self-driving cars, etc., etc., etc. And a lot of these things we don't even see because they're happening in the background. So I think because the place we are already in 4G, it really does push 5G on a trajectory that is a lot faster. And I think we'll learn and mature quite quickly on 5G.
Yeah, I think you made some extremely valuable points there, ST, and I wanted to pick up on a point you made when it comes to innovation. Because Naveen and I, you and I were having a chat a few days ago, and you were telling me about some of the work that you've done unlocking the full potential of 5G in Asia when we're talking about innovation and moving forward that way. You've looked at the economic value, the capex, the challenges, everything basically. So tell us a little bit about this experience and what was, I guess, the key findings of that work.
Yeah, so I would say one of the biggest findings is that we have to look at supply side and demand side in a very different way. So we have to, when we think about 5G, we think about any technology, it tends to be very supply driven. So it's very kind of technology focused product development, and then push it out and then test and use the service over time, and then, generate demand over time. If I look at the demand side is not ready yet in many ways, right? So if you look at end customers, you look at enterprises, you look at consumers, consumers are not are figuring out what they want 5G for. Enterprises are trying to figure out how to use 5G. So I agree with the previous panelists that we're ready. From a supply side, we're ready. If I look at silicon, if I look at optics, if I look at software, which is some of the areas that Cisco is playing a big role in, we're ready from the supply side. We're ready to help telcos implement networks and work with, companies like Qualcomm, to sort of embed the technology into the supply side economics. The key really, Oriel, is like on the demand side. So on the demand side, the study found that disruption is really needed in terms of how the fourth industrial revolution will adopt technologies like 5G. There are many areas of technology. I mean, IoT, advanced robotics, AR, VR, machine learning. There's a whole bunch of exponential technologies that need to be implemented to support certain use cases. Now, the use cases in 5G, particularly in Southeast Asia, the research that we've done is shown to come in 3 areas. The use cases will be primarily in the area of transport and trade, secondly in manufacturing, and thirdly in agriculture. So we hear a lot about autonomous vehicles, and we hear a lot about really exciting kind of developments around the use of 5G, and I agree they're there on the horizon. But if I was to think about the real demand in the next 1 to 2 years, it would be in those 3 verticals. So I'd love to talk about this a little bit further, because it requires an ecosystem change to make sure that companies like Singtel, like Qualcomm, like Cisco can actually help end customers achieve their objectives. And that requires ecosystem change. And that's the part I think I want to make a big point about, is that it's not easy to make ecosystem change.
No, I think that is probably, and correct me for the panelists if I'm wrong, one of the biggest challenges when it comes to 5G. And Mark, we had a discussion about this as well, and you talked exactly about that, how the ecosystem needs to be in place, and we need to work in collaboration and partnership with many others to make sure it happens in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with the points that have been made. As I mentioned, I think we are in the early days of 5G, the full benefits, the full power of 5G. I think because the standards just got confirmed this year, so the equipment that deliver the full suite of benefits will come next year. The early use cases of 5G that we see are dependent on the high uplink speeds, doing things like high throughput of live video, cloud gaming, and as well as perhaps playback of 4K video. I think it is important to also remember that there needs to be a phase of trial and error for the ecosystem to be formed. How long will this take? I think it is about 5 years, taking reference from 4G. The first 4G network that was launched and built in the US was in 2002. It was launched in 2002. 5 years later, the first iPhone, sorry, that was a 3G network. We take reference from a 3G network. 2002, first 3G network in the US. 2007, the first iPhone was launched. And so it took roughly about 5 years to put the whole thing together. And when it launched, because the first guy who launches the first successful transformation, disruption ecosystem really captures the worm, and it continues to drive the wave into 4G until today. So I would say there's probably an incubation period where there's a fair amount of trial and error. for businesses to look at their processes, put the different parts of technology together, and think about how they re-engineer their product or their service and bring that to market. So in this period, that you'll see, I think initially a lot of consumer use cases driven by the higher speeds of 5G, but the real transformation and disruption in 5G will come when enterprises put it together and just look at how a smartphone changed the way we live and work. Yeah. Thank you.
I'd like to get a viewpoint from the other panelists as well on the time frame here, because you'd have to think that COVID-19, the impact of the pandemic globally, has sped up and would be speeding up that rate of innovation and that rate of change. Would that be correct?
I'll go first.
Please.
I think because 5G is no longer just a smartphone, that's why we're having a very interesting discussions about the new real transformative areas where 5G will actually bring out, like smart factories, Industrial 4.0 and all that. There's no doubt in my mind that those things will take time. They will take time because they're proof of concept, they're proof of services, and proof of businesses. But the first wave of 5G is going to be propelled by the fact that you have mobile devices that are now working faster, more detailed. You're going to have a lot more clear, for instance, video on your PC, for instance. So with the pandemic being there, a lot of use cases that is not even has anything to do with, let's say, smart factories will happen. I think those things will happen relatively fast. I mean, we're working with things like, always connected PC. This is like a PC that is, you open it up, it's already on the network and it's on 5G. And in the past, PC with just a normal camera will now have a smartphone plus camera, and you're going to see all the clarities that you would expect from a smartphone, plus the battery life, plus the speed that you would, and it's always connected. Take that a little bit further. With 5G, because of the bandwidth, because of the speed and all that, collaboration, like we do that a lot during this pandemic, collaboration, meetings and all those things, a lot more seamless interactions, a lot more sharing of information, a lot more virtual feelings, because we can't be together, so we want to use technologies to bring as much reality to the collaboration. I think those things will happen, and those things will happen because these devices exist. 5G-based PC, 5G smartphone, 5G-based VR, XR devices, and so on and so forth. So there will be that phase of 5G transformations that's going to happen quite rapidly. And then you're going to have that, beyond the usual thing that you go into the industrial, you go into the agriculture, and so on and so forth. That will take maybe a little bit longer because, those projects usually takes a lot more cross-sector and cross-industrial collaboration. There is no way those things can happen without collaboration, for sure. So this is how I would view the progress of 5G. Now, the first wave is going to be all those devices, and with those devices, very smart people that put software and things, taking advantage of what 5G can bring out, because pandemic also helped drive some of those use case needs that we are all experiencing today.
Yeah, maybe I can pick up on that. That's a great point. Like if I think about when we talk about collaboration, for us as a company, we think of WebEx, we think of Zoom, we think of all of these companies, think about platforms for communication. When we think about collaboration in an industrial environment, we're talking about sensors, like ST talked about. We're talking about, collaboration between, say, a production manufacturing system and a supply management system or a logistics system. Now, when you think about collaboration in that sense, and you think about the number of devices that are going to be connected to these platforms, you're quickly scaling up into millions of devices, tens of millions of devices that are interacting real time with a production network or a 5G quality network like what Singtel has, for example. Now, this kind of quality networks need to be secure, right? So security is going to be a key factor around collaboration in industrial environments. So those networks need to be secured every single millisecond, not just every call or every data session, but every millisecond. And that means, if I just take Cisco as an example in our own company, at this point in time, we see about 20 billion threats a day. Okay, 20 billion. There are only about 7 or 8 billion Google searches a day, right? So we see 3 times the number of threats on our systems per day than the number of Google searches worldwide. So you need automation at scale and you need security at scale in order to enable a production network or a manufacturing network to be secure and trusted. So the key thing for me is trust. So trust is absolutely essential for companies to adopt 5G, because if they don't feel like their data is secure, their production data is secure, employee data is secure, customer data, even supplier data is secure, they're not going to adopt the service. So trust is absolutely a fundamental prerequisite for collaboration.
Agree.
Mark, come on in here, because when we're talking about trust and security of networks and so forth, I mean, I completely agree with Naveen. That's going to be significant when you're talking about getting people to move a little bit faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I think security is essential, critical to anything that we build these days. Unfortunately, the cyber threats are rising. But I would like to add on to what ST was talking about. He was saying, you build the network, the rest will come. Yes, there's a phase of collaboration. The point I'm trying to make is nobody will be able to do it alone. And so we need to work with different ecosystem partners. And for this, we need open interfaces. It is extremely important. While the standards of 5G are established, you have device makers, software developers, application solution providers. They have to do their own development. So it is crucial that, as we test and trial solutions, we all adopt open interfaces aligned to certain industry standards, whether it's a TM Forum, ETSI, etc., so that different parts of that whole ecosystem can communicate with each other and reduce the friction of putting together a holistic solution. Yeah. Of course, wrapping this up in a secure environment.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe just to jump in, I agree that's so important, because currently, if you look at the delivery of 4G or even 3G services, they have been from a telco to almost direct in many ways to a consumer or through a partner to an enterprise. But when you think about the delivery of a 5G service, like for example, if that service is remote healthcare, for example, which is a good application use case, 10 millisecond latency networks can provide, remote surgical applications. That might require more ecosystem partners to come on board. So you can imagine a Singtel network with a systems integrator or an application service provider, maybe then with a hospital specialized partner who then has to integrate equipment from surgical equipment manufacturing into imaging equipment, and then eventually access the hospital. And then the doctors need to be trained and the services need to be rolled out. So you can imagine that it's no longer just 1 or 2 steps to the end customer. You have maybe 5 or 6, maybe 10 people in between to the delivery of the end service. And that's what we mean. I think we're all saying that's what means the ecosystem change is quite critical.
I think maybe I will give an example. We have a couple of, I think to get, real result and real actions into a few of the key use cases. Let me use a smart factory, for example. We currently have a proof of concept going on in Kaohsiung, which is the southern part of Taiwan, in a factory where they do semiconductors. One of the key things, like both Niven and Mark, you say, no one can do it alone. We can't do it alone. We have to partner with Chunghwa Telecom in Taiwan, and we have to partner with ASC, which is our partner. These are all in public domain, so I can share that. We are partnering with ASC, who does a lot of semiconductors together. Is one of the biggest in Taiwan, And then we partnered with a few ODM and OEM partners that do small cells and XR and all that. Only when that happens and when all of us sit together and someone put out the hand and say, I shall project manage this, then you open all the pathway up. And the challenge we have as 5G grow horizontally, you're going to hit on all these possibilities, and you need to grow vertically. And there are thousands of opportunities. That is the challenging statement, because no one company can do. You almost need to have hundreds of these project leaders that stand up and say, I shall be the one that group everybody together. So, you know, without a utopian, like a silver bullet to everything, there needs a few key POCs and then POS, a proof of service, and then a proof of business to propel that transformational change into the use cases of 5G, I think, which I absolutely agree.
So for all those business leaders out there that are listening, what you're saying is put your hand up and say that you're going to be a project leader when it comes to some of this new innovation and technology.
Not just big company, small and medium-sized company, because 5G opened up so many possibilities. I have customers who do furniture, who has his equipment breaking down every so often, and he's a CEO who has no idea what ICT is. He just knows that every time when my machine starts to break down, the sound is different. So he gets a few smart people together who use a sound detector and detect the sound pattern, and use some fundamental AI and say, okay, this machine is going to break down, use very quick network connections to a dashboard that warn them to provide service. There are examples like this all over the place. And it's just great opportunities beyond the big companies. There are all these small and medium-sized enterprises that can really, really look at the possibility and put their hand up and say, I shall project manage. And then, of course, the big company play the big roles, and you know, big companies do the big factories and stuff.
If I may, I think, you know, Oriol, it is, I think, important at this stage for the business leaders to truly understand the power of the technology, the transformational attributes of the technology, and think about how that could possibly change their business. And test and trial solutions now, work with telcos, work with Qualcomm, Cisco, and the like, to test all sorts of ways to perhaps, you know, disrupt your own business model, re-engineer their own business model, and leverage the technology to create an edge. I think we all remember that the older days of the candy bar phone or the clamshell phone, or dare I say BlackBerry. If you don't leverage on the new technology, and it is truly transformational, 5G, we could all well be left behind. So it takes about 5 years. The technology is going to be around, typically each generation lasts about 20 years. So you've got 5 years to do it, and then, you know, to create your product service, and then you've got 15 years to monetize that, you know.
I don't know, do we have 5 years? Are you sure about that? Feels like it's happening possibly a lot faster.
3 years, 4 years, I don't know. Like I said, the early bird catches the worm, so it is crucial.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that might make it longer, and then I think it's important as business leaders need to understand that, because we need to be able to have educated conversations with regulators, because a few things that can hold it back, like spectrum allocation is obviously one. Okay, this can be a big showstopper if governments don't you know, make allowances for this trial and test kind of environment and price up spectrum. It can make it quite, you know, uncompetitive in terms of job creation, and also in economic value. It can reduce the economic value. The other area I think business leaders need to be aware of, and it might sound a bit boring to be honest, but it's actually not, is in understanding cross-border data flows and having a real grasp of regulatory strategy around cross-border data, around things like personal data protection, identity and privacy and security. Because you know, these were matters left to public policy officials in the past. But I think it's become an absolute imperative, and I think technology companies realize this maybe more than others, that regulatory strategy is the cornerstone of corporate strategy when it comes to technologies like 5G. Because, you know, if you are held back from transporting data or even a packet of data. Like for example, at Cisco, we're able to identify if a packet of data or a single instant of data has traversed a particular country. And we can do this at scale by working with public cloud providers or with our own on-prem kind of customer base. Then that might become a regulatory barrier in the future, because currently that is a regulatory barrier. Like, countries are looking for holding everything within the boundaries, geographic boundaries of their country, and that is actually impeding progress. So I think issues like spectrum, cross-border data flows, these are all important issues. Identity, privacy, and security are important factors for the adoption of 5G, and they can hold things back if we're not careful.
Yep.
But that issue of cross-border data flows seems to be a fairly significant issue. And if you look around the world, all countries are most certainly not on the same page.
Yeah, they're not. And I think it's important to realize also another thing which we haven't talked about yet, but there is a lot of data moving to public clouds. So public cloud is actually is going to be an important part of the future, and it is already present. But you have to realize that a lot of public cloud providers and operators have data centers not just in every country. So it's important to realize that cross-border data flows will need to be managed carefully with regulators, because as long as you have control over where the information resides, it doesn't necessarily need to be in country all the time. So I think some moderation around policies around cross-border data flows will be very useful. From our perspective, I mean, we are able to work with public cloud providers, on-premise data centers, and ensure that they work together seamlessly, because that's the nature of Cisco's business, to make sure everything gets connected up. But there are some companies that go purely public cloud, and there are other companies that go purely on-prem, and then there's companies in the middle, which is where the majority of the population is going to be, somewhere in between, what we call a hybrid cloud and a multi-cloud world. And that is the key to ensure adoption works, because adoption in a hybrid and multi-cloud world requires, by definition, cross-border data flows to work.
ST coming in here. Oh, Mark, sorry, you go ahead, please.
Just to add on the role, Navin's point about the role of regulators and government, I think in Singapore, the government has played a very important role, a very pro-business role. They have pledged about $14 million in setting up incubation for new use cases to build up the ecosystem. I think another point to support this whole smart nation initiatives that will be underpinned by 5G is to get ready the public street infrastructure to accommodate sensors, operators pulling in, tapping on power supply, because it is extremely costly to dig up the road to lay a power cable just to fire up a particular sensor. So as the government builds its public infrastructure, it is important, I think they also provision facilities for sensors to be plugged in, provider to tap the power and install the antenna, etc. Because otherwise, it will be costly to equip the public infrastructure with 5G capabilities, and you won't be able to tap on the benefits of 5G.
Yeah.
So I just wish to add that. Yeah. Thank you.
I was just going to comment on that as well. I think it's really encouraging the smart nation policy or strategy that Singapore has that propel, if I remember correctly, haven't been back to Singapore for a long time, digital government, digital economy, and digital society. So I think the government's policy to push digitalizations, and on top of that, put I think $40 million in terms of growing the ecosystem innovations. These are, I think, I've seen these examples in Singapore and in several other countries, including here in Taiwan, where the government is also very proactively pushing these kind of high-level strategy in charting the country towards one direction, but at the same time propelling the knowledge of the people. I think the government in Singapore also have certain educational type thing that train the the workforce and the public awareness of what 5G and the digitalization will bring. And here in Taiwan, we also, as Qualcomm, we run these small and medium-sized enterprise training. And that's a big portion, I think. I think the technology bit of it, all of us are doing, and then, we need the government to play their part, the big corporation to play their part. We all need to collaborate. The public needs to know as well what it does. And more importantly, the small and medium-sized enterprises within the public need to know what it can bring and how to participate. Oftentimes, we find that.
Thank you, Oriel, and the panel for key insights into the race to capture the global 5G market.